I don't have a daddy. Can I spend one day with you, sir?
I don't have a daddy. Can I spend one day with you, sir? The maid's toddler begged the billionaire. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander Hayes's penthouse, casting geometric patterns across the Italian marble floors. At 33, he'd built an empire that most men twice his age could only dream of, tech innovations that had revolutionized how the world communicated, investments that seemed to turn everything he touched into gold, and a reputation for being brilliantly ruthless in the boardroom. His home reflected his success: minimalist elegance, carefully curated art pieces, and a silence that spoke of solitude chosen rather than imposed. He was reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet when he heard it, a sound so foreign to his pristine, ordered world that it made him look up immediately. Giggling. The pure, uninhibited laughter of a child echoed from somewhere near the kitchen. Alexander frowned. His housekeeper, Maria Santos, knew the rules. Her work hours were strictly defined, and bringing her daughter to his home was explicitly against their arrangement. He'd made exceptions for emergencies before, but this didn't sound like an emergency. This sounded like playtime. Setting down his tablet with more force than necessary, Alexander strode toward the kitchen, already forming the professional but firm words he'd use to remind Maria of their agreement. But when he rounded the corner, the speech died on his lips. A tiny girl, no more than 3 years old, sat cross-legged on his kitchen floor, completely absorbed in arranging his expensive copper-bottomed pots into what appeared to be a miniature city. Her dark curls bounced as she moved, and she was narrating an elaborate story to herself about princesses and dragons, using his cookware as characters. She wore a faded yellow dress that had been mended several times, small sneakers with cartoon characters on them, and an expression of such complete joy that something in Alexander's chest tightened unexpectedly. "Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry." Maria's voice was strained with anxiety as she rushed over, her cleaning supplies still in hand. The daycare called. They had a pipe burst, emergency closure. "I tried calling the agency for a replacement, but it's Monday, and everyone was booked. I had nowhere else to take her, and I couldn't miss today because I knew you had that important video conference, and you needed the study cleaned and organized." "Mom said I have to be quiet as a mouse," the little girl interrupted, looking up at Alexander with enormous brown eyes that seemed to take up half her face. "But I forgot, because the pots were having an adventure." "I'm sorry, sir." The formal address from such a small child was jarring. Alexander found himself staring, uncertain how to respond. Children were not part of his world. His schedule consisted of meetings, negotiations, strategy sessions, and the occasional charity gala where children were blessedly absent. He'd built his life around predictability, control, and solitude. This tiny human represented chaos. "How long will she be here?" he asked Maria, his tone measured. "Just until 5 o'clock. I promise she won't bother you. I brought her coloring books and snacks. She'll stay in the kitchen with me." Maria's hands twisted anxiously around the handle of her cleaning caddy. She was a single mother. Alexander knew this from her employment file, and a dedicated worker who'd never given him cause for complaint in the 2 years she'd worked for him. Alexander glanced at his watch. 8 hours. He had 3 video conferences, 24 emails requiring responses, and a development proposal to review. The rational decision was clear: send them both home, hire a temporary replacement for the day, maintain his boundaries. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way Maria's shoulders had tensed, bracing for rejection. Maybe it was remembering a news article he'd read about single mothers struggling to maintain employment. Or maybe, and this thought unsettled him, it was the memory of being a child himself, shuttled between nannies and boarding schools while his own parents built their empire. "Fine," he heard himself say. "But she stays in the kitchen area. I have important calls." The relief on Maria's face was immediate and profound. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Thank you so much. You won't even know she's here." Alexander nodded curtly and returned to his study, determined to forget about his unexpected tiny guest. But throughout his morning, he found his concentration fractured. Between emails, he'd catch himself listening for that giggling. During his first video conference, he heard Maria reading a story in soft Spanish, her voice a gentle murmur that somehow made its way through his closed door. By lunchtime, curiosity, an emotion he usually reserved for market trends and technological innovations, got the better of him. He emerged from his study, ostensibly to get coffee, and found the little girl sitting at his kitchen counter on a bar stool that Maria had carefully positioned, eating a peanut butter sandwich cut into triangles. "I'm Sophia," she announced, sandwich in hand. "What's your name?" "Mr. Hayes," he replied automatically. She wrinkled her nose. "That's not a real name. That's what my mom calls her boss. You need a real name." Despite himself, Alexander felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Alexander." "That's very long," Sophia informed him seriously. "Can I call you Alex?" "No one calls me Alex." "Why not?" It was a child's question, simple and direct, and Alexander realized he didn't have a good answer. "Because they don't." Sophia considered this while chewing thoughtfully. "My mom says you're very important and very busy. Are you too busy to eat lunch?" "I usually work through lunch." Her eyes widened with something that looked like pity. "That's sad. Lunch is the best part of the day. Well, except for dinner. And breakfast. And snack time." She paused. "Do you like cookies?" "I don't eat many cookies," Alexander admitted. "Also sad," Sophia declared with the gravity of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. "My mom makes really good cookies, but we don't make them lots because ingredients cost money. But when we do, they're the best in the whole world. She puts chocolate chips in them." Alexander found himself leaning against the counter, something he never did during his regimented days. "Is that so?" "Uh-huh. And she lets me help. I'm very good at stirring. I hardly ever spill now." She held up her small hands proudly, as if displaying credentials. Maria appeared from the hallway, slightly breathless. "Sophia, honey, let Mr. Hayes get his coffee. I'm sure he's busy." But Alexander surprised himself again. "She's fine. She was telling me about your cookies." "Oh, I'm sorry. She can talk your ear off if you let her." Maria's cheeks flushed slightly. "It's not a problem." And to his genuine surprise, he found he meant it. As he returned to his study with his coffee, Alexander noticed something unusual. He was smiling. It was a small smile, barely there, but real nonetheless. Behind him, he could hear Sophia launching into another story, this one involving a bear who is friends with a butterfly, and Maria's patient responses. The afternoon stretched ahead, and for the first time in years, Alexander Hayes's perfectly controlled world felt different. Not disrupted, different. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a long-dormant part of him whispered that maybe, just maybe, different wasn't entirely bad. The afternoon sun had shifted position, painting Alexander's study in warm amber light. He'd been trying to focus on a development proposal for 30 minutes, reading the same paragraph over and over without absorbing a single word. The problem wasn't the content. He'd reviewed hundreds of similar documents. The problem was the silence. For 2 years, he'd valued the quiet efficiency of his home during Maria's working hours. Now, inexplicably, the silence felt heavy. Wrong. He caught himself listening for the sounds from the kitchen, Sophia's chatter, Maria's gentle responses, the small domestic noises of their presence. Finally, he gave up pretending to work and stood, walking to the window that overlooked Central Park. 42 floors below, tiny figures moved through their lives. Couples walking dogs, nannies pushing strollers, business people rushing between appointments. From this height, everyone looked the same, their individual struggles and joys reduced to anonymous movement. That's a lot of trees. Alexander spun around. Sophia stood in his doorway, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit in one hand. She wore mismatched socks, He noticed these details now, one with strawberries, one with polka dots. You're supposed to stay in the kitchen, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. I know. But Mom is cleaning your bathroom, and she said I couldn't come because of the chemicals, so I had to wait, and waiting is very boring. She stepped into his study uninvited, her small sneakers silent on his Persian rug. Is this where you work? Yes. It's very neat. Mom says you like everything neat. She walked to his desk, standing on tiptoes to peer at his screens. What are you working on? Alexander found himself at a loss. How did you explain quarterly projections and development proposals to a 3-year-old? I'm looking at plans for a new building. Are you a builder? My friend Jackson's dad is a builder. He wears a yellow hat. I'm not that kind of builder. I invest in projects. I help decide what gets built. Sophia processed this, her face scrunched in concentration. So you're like the boss of builders? Something like that. That sounds important. She climbed onto one of his leather chairs, her feet dangling several inches off the ground. But also lonely. The observation, so casually delivered, hit Alexander harder than any business competitor's insult ever had. What makes you say that? You're all by yourself in this big house. And you work in here all by yourself. And Mom says you don't have family who visits. She swung her feet back and forth. That's lonely. I'm busy, Alexander said, the defense automatic. That's what grown-ups say when they're lonely but don't want to admit it, Sophia replied with the unnerving wisdom of the very young. Mom says that sometimes too. Alexander sat down in his chair, for once abandoning the pretense of standing at his desk to maintain authority. Your mother is lonely? Sophia nodded, suddenly serious. She cries sometimes at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. Quiet crying, into her pillow. I think she misses my daddy. Where is your father? The question was too personal, crossing boundaries he'd maintained for years with his staff. But somehow, in this moment, the boundaries seemed less important. I don't have one, Sophia said matter-of-factly. I mean, I did because that's how babies happen. Mom explained it scientifically so I'd understand. But he left before I was born. Mom says he wasn't ready to be a daddy, and that's okay because we're a great team, just the two of us. But sometimes I think she's sad about it. The matter-of-fact way Sophia discussed her family situation made Alexander's chest ache. This child had already learned to accept absence, to rationalize abandonment. At 3 years old, she was comforting her mother about a loss she barely understood. Do you remember him? Alexander asked. No. I have one picture, but it's blurry. Mom says I have his nose. She touched her small nose thoughtfully. But I have her smile. Everyone says so. Before Alexander could respond, Sophia slid off the chair and walked to his bookshelf, studying the titles with exaggerated interest. Do you have any books with pictures? Those are business books. Economics, technology, market analysis. Boring, Sophia announced. Then, catching herself, she added, Sorry. Mom says I shouldn't call things boring even if they are. Despite himself, Alexander laughed, a real laugh, not the polite chuckle he deployed at business dinners. It's okay. They are a bit boring. Sophia beamed at this confession. She continued her exploration of his study, touching things gently, respectfully, as if she understood these objects were important even if she didn't know why. When she reached his desk, she noticed a framed photograph he kept turned slightly away, the only personal item in the room. Who's this? She asked, pointing at the photo of a younger Alexander with an older couple. My parents. They look nice. Do they visit you? They passed away a few years ago. Alexander was surprised at how easily he shared this. He never talked about his parents, not even with his business partners who'd known him for years. Sophia's face crumpled with sympathy. That's so sad. Now you really don't have any family. I have cousins, but we're not close. Why not? Again, that child's directness. Why not? Because he'd been too busy building his empire. Because he'd let relationships atrophy while he focused on quarterly returns. Because somewhere along the way, he'd confused success with fulfillment. I suppose I didn't make time for them, he admitted. Sophia climbed back onto the chair, this time directly across from him, her small face very serious. Mom says time is the most important thing we have. She says money can come and go, but time only goes. So we have to use it for important things. Your mother is very wise. She's the smartest person I know, Sophia said proudly. Then, with devastating innocence, she added, but she's also scared a lot. Alexander leaned forward. Scared of what? Bills. She looks at papers with numbers, and her face gets all wrinkly with worry. And she's scared of losing her job. She tells her friend Rosa on the phone that if she loses this job, we might have to move somewhere cheaper, and my school is here, and her work is here. Sophia's voice got smaller. I don't want to move. The casual revelation of Maria's financial anxiety made Alexander uncomfortable. He paid her well, at least he thought he did. But what did he really know about the cost of raising a child in New York City on a housekeeper's salary? I'm sure your mother is doing her best, he said, the words inadequate. She's doing the best of anyone, Sophia said fiercely. She works so hard. She has 2 jobs, this one and cleaning offices at night 3 times a week. She says it's temporary until she saves enough for a better apartment and can work just 1 job. But it's been temporary for a long time. 2 jobs. Maria worked for him during the day and cleaned offices at night, all while raising this precocious, perceptive child alone. Alexander felt something unfamiliar. Shame. He'd never asked Maria about her life, never inquired if she needed different hours or better benefits. She was simply part of his efficient household, like the automated lights or the security system. Your mother must be very tired, he said quietly. Sometimes she falls asleep putting me to bed, Sophia confirmed. And she doesn't eat enough. She always gives me the bigger portion and says she's not hungry, but I know she is. She looked at Alexander with those enormous eyes. You're rich, right? The question caught him off guard. Yes, I suppose I am. Mom says money isn't the most important thing, but it sure helps when you don't have enough of it. Sophia swung her feet again. If I had lots of money, I'd make sure Mom didn't have to work at night anymore. And I'd buy her the fancy coffee she likes but says is too expensive. And I'd get us an apartment with 2 bedrooms so I don't have to sleep on the pull-out couch anymore. Each statement was delivered without self-pity, just simple facts. And each one felt like an indictment of Alexander's carefully constructed world of excess and isolation. Before he could respond, Maria appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless. Sophia, I told you to wait in the kitchen. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes. It's fine, Alexander said quickly. We were just talking. Maria looked between them, clearly uncertain. I'm almost done. Just the master bedroom left, and then we'll be out of your hair. Take your time, Alexander heard himself say. Then, impulsively, Maria, do you have childcare arranged for the rest of the week? Her face fell slightly. The daycare should be fixed by Wednesday. I'll figure out tomorrow and Tuesday. Bring her with you. Both Maria and Sophia stared at him in shock. Mr. Hayes, I couldn't. You can work more efficiently if you're not worried about her, Alexander said, his tone businesslike to mask the unexpected emotion behind the offer. And apparently, my study could use some company that isn't afraid to call my books boring. Sophia giggled, and Maria's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise she'll be no trouble. After they left his study, Alexander sat alone with his thoughts. The development proposal remained unread on his screen. The quarterly reports could wait. For the first time in longer than he could remember, numbers and projections seemed less urgent than the revelation that had just occurred. There was a whole world of struggle and love and sacrifice happening right in his home, and he'd been too insulated to notice. He pulled up Maria's employment file on his computer and began making notes. Then he did something he'd never done before. He started researching what childcare actually cost in Manhattan, what single mothers needed to thrive, not just survive. By the time 5 o'clock came, Alexander had made several decisions. But as he heard Sophia's cheerful goodbye echo through his penthouse, he realized the most important decision was the simplest one: to pay attention, to see the people in his life as people, not functions. "Bye, Alex," Sophia called, ignoring her mother's mortified correction. "Goodbye, Sophia," he called back and found himself smiling again. Tuesday morning arrived with rain pattering against the windows, turning the city below into an impressionist painting of grays and muted lights. Alexander had been awake since 5, which wasn't unusual, but the reason for his distracted state was entirely new. He'd spent the previous evening doing something he never did, reconsidering his priorities. When Maria arrived at 8 with Sophia in tow, both slightly damp despite their umbrella, Alexander was waiting with towels. "I thought you might need these," he said, handing them over. Maria looked stunned by the gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'm sorry, we're a bit wet. The subway station was flooded, and we had to walk an extra 3 blocks. "You take the subway from where?" Alexander asked, realizing he didn't even know where his housekeeper lived. "The Bronx. Fordham Road area. It's about an hour on a good day, longer when it rains." An hour each way, Alexander calculated, plus her working hours, plus her evening job 3 nights a week, plus caring for a 3-year-old. When did Maria sleep? "Mom, I'm hungry," Sophia announced, shaking off rain like a small puppy. "I packed you breakfast, honey. We'll eat it in the kitchen while I start work." "Actually," Alexander heard himself say, "I was going to make breakfast. Would you both like to join me?" The surprise on Maria's face was almost comical. "You cook, Mr. Hayes?" "I went to Cornell," he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I survived 4 years of dormitory life. I can manage eggs." 20 minutes later, the 3 of them sat at his kitchen island, a piece of furniture Alexander had never actually used for eating, with plates of scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. Sophia had insisted on helping, and Alexander found himself with a tiny sous chef who took her egg-stirring duties very seriously. "You have to stir in circles, not back and forth," Sophia instructed. "Circles make them fluffy." "Where did you learn that?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious. "Cooking show. Mom lets me watch one sometimes while she's getting ready for her night job." Sophia popped a strawberry in her mouth. "The chef says cooking is about love. Are you putting love in these eggs?" Maria looked mortified. "Sophia, It's a fair question," Alexander interrupted. He looked at the small girl seriously. "I'm trying to. I think I might be out of practice." "That's okay," Sophia assured him. "Mom says practice makes better. Not perfect, because perfect isn't real. Just better." As they ate, Alexander learned more about their lives. Sophia attended a preschool program at a community center 4 mornings a week. Maria had been saving for 2 years to afford a used car, but every time she got close, something would happen. Sophia would need new shoes, or get sick, or the rent would increase. "The Bronx isn't so bad," Maria said, seeming to feel the need to defend her choices. "Our neighborhood is safe, mostly. And Sophia has friends there. The community center has good programs. Mom helps teach English there on Saturdays," Sophia added proudly. "She speaks Spanish and English perfect." "Perfectly," Maria corrected gently. "See?" Sophia grinned at Alexander. "Perfect." After breakfast, Maria began her work, and Sophia set up her coloring books at the kitchen table. Alexander returned to his study, but he left the door open, another first. Throughout the morning, he could hear their gentle interactions, Maria humming while she cleaned, Sophia narrating her coloring adventures, the domestic soundtrack he'd never known he was missing. Around 10, his calendar reminder chimed. Video conference in 30 minutes with investors in Tokyo. Important meeting. He needed to prepare. But he found himself walking to the kitchen instead. Sophia, I have a meeting soon. I need you to be very quiet for about an hour.
Can you do that?
Sophia looked up from her coloring book, where she'd been creating what appeared to be a purple elephant wearing a crown. I can be quiet as a mouse. Quieter even. Like a butterfly. Butterflies aren't particularly known for being quiet, Alexander noted. Because you can't hear them at all. Sophia beamed at her logic. Despite the pending meeting, Alexander smiled. Fair point. Butterfly quiet it is. The meeting started well. Alexander was in his element, discussing projected returns, market analysis, technological advantages. Then, about 20 minutes in, he heard it. A crash from the kitchen, followed by Sophia crying. Excuse me one moment, he told the investors, muting his microphone and stepping out. In the kitchen, he found Maria kneeling beside Sophia, who sat surrounded by the shards of what had been a vase, an expensive Murano glass piece his interior designer had selected. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes, Maria said, her voice tight with panic. She was trying to help me dust, and she reached for the vase. I'll replace it, I promise. It might take a few months, but I'll replace it. Sophia's face was streaked with tears. I'm sorry. I just wanted to help Mommy because she works so hard and gets so tired, and I thought if I dusted like a big girl, she wouldn't have to. She dissolved into sobs. Alexander knelt beside them, carefully picking up the larger pieces of glass. Sophia, look at me. She hiccuped, meeting his eyes with terrified anticipation of anger. Are you hurt? He asked gently. And no. That's the only thing that matters. It's just a vase. But it's broken, Sophia whispered. Vases can be replaced. You cannot. Are you sure you're not cut anywhere? Maria was already checking Sophia's hands and feet. She's okay. No cuts. Alexander nodded. Then there's no problem. Maria, please don't worry about replacing it. I never liked it much anyway, my designer picked it. He stood looking at them both. I have to finish my meeting, but after, how about we have some lunch? All of us. After he left, he could hear Maria comforting Sophia, her voice gentle but firm. See, baby? Mr. Hayes isn't angry. But we need to be more careful, okay?
He was nice, Mommy.
He said I'm more important than the vase. Yes, he was very kind. Alexander returned to his meeting, but something had shifted. The investors were discussing risk assessment, but all he could think about was a 3-year-old who thought she needed to help her exhausted mother dust. A child who understood sacrifice and effort in ways most adults never would. When the meeting ended, he made a decision. He called his executive assistant. Jennifer, I need you to research something for me. Best preschools in Manhattan with full-day programs and after-school care. Ones with financial aid or scholarship opportunities. And find out what our company's benefits package offers for household staff. I want a full report by end of day. Household staff, sir? We don't typically. Then we're going to start. Full benefits, including healthcare, retirement matching, and childcare assistance. Make it happen. After lunch, which consisted of grilled cheese sandwiches that Sophia declared the best she'd ever had, Alexander did something unprecedented.
He closed his laptop.
Sophia, you said you've never seen your building. Would you like a tour? Her eyes went wide. Really? The whole thing? The whole thing. Maria started to protest. Mr. Hayes, you don't have to. I want to, he said simply. And he realized it was true. For the next hour, Alexander Hayes, billionaire tech entrepreneur, gave a guided tour to a 3-year-old. They rode the elevator to the rooftop terrace, where Sophia pressed her nose against the safety glass and gasped at the view. They visited the gym on the 40th floor, where she tried to lift the smallest weight and declared it really, really heavy. They explored the private library on the 35th floor, where Sophia found a picture book someone had left behind and asked Alexander to read it.
So he did.
Sitting on a leather couch in a library he'd never used, Alexander read The Velveteen Rabbit to a little girl who hung on every word. And when he got to the part about becoming real through being loved, his voice caught slightly. "Are you sad?" Sophia asked, concerned. "No," Alexander said. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how sometimes we don't realize what we're missing until someone shows us." Sophia seemed to consider this. Then she patted his hand with her small one. "It's okay. You're not missing it anymore. You have me and Mom now." The simple statement, delivered with complete sincerity, made Alexander's throat tight. When had he become so isolated that a child's declaration of friendship could move him to tears? That evening, as Maria prepared to leave, Alexander stopped her. "Maria, I've been thinking. Your current salary doesn't reflect the value you bring to this household. Effective immediately, you're getting a 40% raise." Maria's mouth opened and closed. "Mr. Hayes, that's too much." "It's not enough, but it's a start. Additionally, I'm extending full benefits, health insurance, dental, retirement matching. And I'm covering Sophia's preschool tuition and after-school care." "I can't accept." "You can, and you will. Consider it an investment. I need you working here, not exhausted from 2 jobs. And Sophia needs stability." He paused. "I need to know you're both taken care of." Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks. "Why are you doing this?" Alexander looked at Sophia, who was drowsing in her mother's arms, exhausted from their adventures. "Because someone recently reminded me that time is the most important thing we have. And you've been spending too much of yours worrying about money instead of enjoying your daughter." Maria couldn't speak. She just nodded, clutching Sophia tighter. As they left, Sophia stirred enough to wave sleepily. "Bye, Alex. You're a good friend." Alone in his penthouse, Alexander walked to his study and looked at the development proposal he'd been avoiding. The numbers were there, the projections sound, the investment likely profitable. But for the first time, he found himself asking a different question. What was it for? He'd spent 15 years building wealth, creating success, achieving goals. But to what end? So he could live alone in a pristine penthouse, respected by colleagues who didn't really know him, successful by every external measure but connected to no one? A 3-year-old had walked into his carefully controlled life and shown him what he'd been missing: connection, purpose, the messy, beautiful reality of caring about someone other than himself. Alexander pulled out his phone and began typing an email to his executive team. It was time to restructure more than just his household staff benefits. It was time to restructure his entire approach to life. But that could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, he did something he hadn't done in years. He went to bed early, and he slept soundly, dreaming of purple elephants wearing crowns and tiny hands that had somehow reached across the chasm of his isolation and pulled him back toward humanity. Wednesday arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of New York morning where the light made the city look brand new. The daycare had reopened, but when Maria called to confirm that she wouldn't need to bring Sophia anymore, Alexander surprised both of them by insisting she continue. "She can come whenever you want," he'd said. "I've gotten used to having her around." That was an understatement. In just 3 days, Sophia had become a fixture in his routine. He now kept juice boxes in his refrigerator alongside his imported mineral water. A section of his bookshelf held picture books. His previously silent penthouse had come alive with laughter and questions and the peculiar magic that only a child could bring. But Thursday afternoon brought a change that would alter the course of all their lives. Alexander was in his study, genuinely focused on work for the first time all week, when Sophia appeared in his doorway. She'd been playing quietly in the living room while Maria cleaned the bedrooms, but something about her posture made Alexander set down his tablet immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked. Sophia shifted from foot to foot, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. She'd been chatty all week, but now she seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" Her voice was small. Of course. Come here. Alexander gestured to the chair across from his desk, and Sophia climbed up, her small face serious. At preschool, we're having Father's Day next week, she began, not meeting his eyes. Everyone is making cards and presents for their daddies. Alexander felt his chest constrict. He hadn't thought about Father's Day in years. It had just been another day on the calendar since his own father passed. What did your teacher say you should do? He asked gently. She said I could make one for Grandpa, but I don't have a grandpa. Mom's daddy died before I was born, and I don't have a daddy's daddy because I don't have a daddy. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. All the other kids have someone. Even Jackson, whose parents are divorced, he has two daddies now because his mom remarried. I'm sorry, Sophia. That must feel unfair. It does, she whispered. Then, after a long pause, she said the words that would change everything. I don't have a daddy. Can I spend one day with you, sir? Just pretend for Father's Day? So I can know what it's like. The question hung in the air between them, so innocent and yet so profound. Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. All the walls he'd built, all the carefully maintained distance, all the protection he'd wrapped around his heart. Sophia, he began, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. You don't have to, she said quickly, misreading his tone. I know you're very busy and important. Mom says important people don't have time for pretend. But I thought maybe since you don't have a family either, you might like to pretend too. Just for one day. Alexander stood and walked around his desk, kneeling beside her chair, so they were at eye level. Why me, Sophia? You could ask anyone. She touched his face with one small hand, the gesture so trusting it nearly undid him. Because you're nice. And you're lonely like Mom. And when you smile, which you do more now, it makes you look happy. I think maybe you need someone to make cards for too. From the doorway came a sharp intake of breath. Maria stood there, her cleaning supplies forgotten, her hand pressed to her mouth. Sophia, you can't ask Mr. Hayes. It's okay, Alexander said, standing but keeping his hand on Sophia's shoulder. Maria, could you give us a moment? After Maria left, looking stricken, Alexander sat down in the chair beside Sophia's, abandoning all pretense of professional distance. Sophia, I would be honored to spend Father's Day with you. Not pretend. Real. Really real. Her face lit up like the sunrise. Really real. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. She nodded solemnly. What if it wasn't just for one day? What if I could be someone who's there for you more than that? Not replacing anyone, but just being someone you can count on. Sophia's brow furrowed as she processed this. Like a friend. Like family, Alexander heard himself say, and the word felt right in a way nothing had in years. I can't be your father. You're right that you don't have one, and I can't change the past. But I could be someone who cares about you. Someone who wants to be in your life if you and your mom would like that. You mean like a uncle? Sophia asked. Or maybe. Alexander paused, realizing he was about to cross a threshold he couldn't uncross. Maybe something more. I need to talk to your mom about it. But yes, like family. Sophia launched herself from her chair into his arms, nearly knocking him over.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. I would like that so much. Alexander hugged her back, this tiny person who'd bulldozed through his defenses with nothing but honest questions and genuine affection. When she pulled back, she was beaming. Can we tell Mom? Let's tell Mom together. They found Maria in the kitchen, pacing anxiously. When she saw them, she immediately started apologizing. Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was going to ask you that. I never put her up to it, I swear. I've never talked about you like that. Maria, please sit down. She sat, looking terrified, and Sophia climbed into her lap. Alexander took the chair across from them, struck by the contrast between this moment and the professional distance he'd maintained for so long. "Your daughter asked me a question today," he began. "She asked if she could spend Father's Day with me because she doesn't have a father and thought I might like someone to make cards for." Maria's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry. Stop apologizing," Alexander said gently but firmly. "What I'm trying to say is that her question made me realize something. I've been living in this penthouse for 5 years, building my career, making money, achieving every goal I set for myself. But I've been doing it alone. And I didn't realize how alone I was until Sophia walked into my kitchen 4 days ago and started arranging my pots into cities." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, looking at both of them. "Maria, you're an incredible mother. Sophia is kind, thoughtful, curious, and joyful because of you. But I can see how hard you're working, how much you're carrying alone. And Sophia deserves to have more than one person in her corner." "What are you saying?" Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm saying I want to be involved in both your lives. Not as an employer. Well, yes, as an employer, but also as someone who cares. I want to help with Sophia's education, her activities, the things she needs. I want to be someone she can call when she has questions or needs help or just wants to talk." Tears were streaming down Maria's face now. "You don't owe us anything. This isn't about owing. This is about wanting. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I want something that isn't a business deal or an acquisition or a return on investment. I want to matter to someone. I want someone to matter to me." He looked at Sophia, who was watching him with those enormous eyes. "And it turns out I'm too late. She already matters. You both do." Maria was crying too hard to speak, so Sophia patted her mother's hand and looked at Alexander. "Does this mean we're family now?" "If your mother agrees, then yes. Family. What about the pretend part?" Sophia asked. Alexander smiled. And this time it wasn't a small, uncertain smile. It was broad and genuine, and felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. "No pretend.
Real.
Really real, as you said." Sophia looked at her mother. "Mom, can we say yes? Can Alex be our family?" Maria finally found her voice, though it shook with emotion. "Mr. Hayes, Alexander, this is so generous, but you don't know what you're taking on. She's 3. There will be tantrums and questions at inconvenient times and mess and noise and... I've had 3 years of silence and order, Maria. I'm ready for mess and noise. I'm ready for real life." "Why?" Maria asked the fundamental question. "Why us? Why now?" Alexander thought about his answer. He could tell her about the loneliness he'd finally acknowledged, about the emptiness of achievement without connection, about the hole in his life he hadn't known needed filling. But the truth was simpler. Because Sophia asked. Because she saw through all my walls and decided I was worth asking. Because she's 3 years old and already understands that sometimes people need each other, and she was brave enough to ask if I needed her. How could I say no to that? He stood up, suddenly nervous about their answer. "I know this is sudden. You don't have to decide right now. Think about it." "Yes," Maria said. "Yes."
Yes.
"I've been doing this alone for 4 years. For years of being terrified I'll mess up, that I won't be enough, that Sophia will suffer because her mother can't give her everything she deserves. If you're serious, if you really want to be part of our lives, then yes. God, yes." Sophia squealed and clapped her hands. "We're a family. We're really a family. We're really a family," Alexander confirmed, and felt something settle in his chest, something warm and right and real. "Can I call you Alex now?" Sophia asked. "For real, not just in my head? You can call me whatever you want." She thought about this very seriously. "I think Alex. Because you're not my daddy, but you're not Mr. Hayes anymore either. You're Alex and you're ours." "I'm yours," Alexander agreed, and the words felt like a vow. Later that evening, after Maria and Sophia had gone home, though not before Alexander had driven them himself, insisting that subway rides in the dark were over. He stood in his penthouse and took stock of his new reality. In 4 days, a 3-year-old had done what no business partner, no friend, no family member had managed in 15 years. She'd made him feel like he belonged somewhere. Like he mattered for who he was, not what he could achieve or acquire. His phone buzzed with a message from Maria. Sophia won't stop talking about Father's Day. She's already planning what she'll make you at preschool. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for choosing us. Alexander typed back. Thank you for letting me in. I'm the one who is chosen, and I'm grateful. He looked around his pristine penthouse, the carefully curated art, the expensive furniture, the success markers that suddenly seemed hollow. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd ask Sophia what color she liked. Maybe it was time for some changes. Maybe it was time to make this place feel less like a museum and more like a home where a little girl could visit and feel welcome. Maybe it was time to become real. The week leading up to Father's Day transformed Alexander's life in ways he couldn't have imagined. He'd built companies, closed billion-dollar deals, revolutionized technologies, but nothing had prepared him for the particular chaos and joy of becoming part of a family. On Friday, Sophia arrived with a mission. We need to make this place more fun, she announced, surveying his living room with the critical eye of a 3-year-old interior designer. It's very pretty, but pretty isn't the same as fun. What would make it more fun? Alexander asked, genuinely curious. Sophia walked around, touching things carefully, as if assessing their potential. Colors. And maybe some pillows for building forts. And definitely a place where we can draw that isn't the kitchen table, because Mom needs that for working. By the end of the day, Alexander had ordered a child-sized table and chairs, an art supply station, and, at Sophia's insistence, a collection of colorful throw pillows that would make his interior designer weep. He'd also cleared out a corner of his living room, removing a sculpture he'd never liked anyway, to make space for what Sophia called the creation station. You're sure about this? Maria asked, watching him move furniture with an ease that belied its expensive status. This is your home. We're just visitors. No, Alexander said firmly. You're family. And family doesn't visit. Family belongs. That weekend, Alexander did something unprecedented. He cleared his entire calendar. No emails, no calls, no video conferences. On Saturday morning, he picked up Maria and Sophia in a car seat he'd had professionally installed in his Mercedes, which had required 3 phone calls and an expedited service appointment. Where are we going? Sophia bounced in her seat as they drove through Manhattan. It's a surprise, Alexander said, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. But I think you'll like it. The surprise was the Bronx Zoo. Alexander hadn't been to a zoo since he was a child himself, but he'd remembered Sophia mentioning she'd never seen a real elephant. Her reaction when they reached the elephant enclosure made every moment of planning worthwhile. She pressed against the barrier, absolutely mesmerized, as a mother elephant and her calf moved gracefully through their habitat. They're so big, she whispered, as if afraid she might scare them. And so beautiful. Look, Alex. The baby is playing. Alexander found himself watching Sophia more than the elephants, captivated by her pure wonder. When had he lost that ability to be amazed? At what point had he stopped seeing magic in the world? Can we see everything? Sophia asked. Every single animal? We can try, Alexander said, and Maria laughed. You have no idea what you've just agreed to. She'll want to stay until closing.
She did.
They spent 7 hours at the zoo, and Alexander couldn't remember the last time 7 hours had passed so quickly. They saw lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! Sophia shouted, giggling at her own Wizard of Oz reference. They watched penguins waddle and seals swim. They ate overpriced hot dogs and ice cream that dripped in the June heat. At the Butterfly Conservatory, Sophia stood very still as butterflies landed on her outstretched hands, her face radiating such joy that Alexander had to take a photo. Then another. Then several more. "You're going to fill your entire phone," Maria teased. "I don't care," Alexander replied, and he meant it. "I want to remember all of this." As the day wound down, they found a quiet spot near the sea lion pool. Sophia, exhausted, climbed into Alexander's lap as naturally as if she'd been doing it her whole life. "This was the best day ever," she murmured, her head against his chest. "Better than my birthday. Better than Christmas. Better than anything." "For me too," Alexander said softly, and Maria's hand found his, squeezing gently. They sat there as the sun began to set, an unlikely family bound not by blood but by choice, and Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Not the satisfaction of a successful deal or the rush of a profitable quarter, but the deep, quiet contentment of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Sunday was devoted to Father's Day preparation. Sophia took her duties very seriously, sitting at her new art table with construction paper, glue, glitter, and unwavering focus. "You can't look," she warned Alexander. "It's a surprise for Father's Day." "I won't look," he promised, retreating to his study. But he left the door open so he could hear her working, the snip of scissors, her muttered conversations with herself, Maria's gentle guidance. Around noon, Maria appeared in his doorway. "Can we talk?" Alexander gestured to the chair across from his desk, but Maria shook her head. "Not here. Somewhere private." They went to the terrace, 42 floors above the city, where the noise of traffic was a distant hum and they could speak without Sophia hearing. "Is everything okay?" Alexander asked, concerned by Maria's serious expression. "Everything is incredible. Too incredible. That's what I need to talk to you about." Maria wrapped her arms around herself, despite the warm day. "Alexander, what you're doing for us, the salary increase, the benefits, the time you're spending with Sophia, it's life-changing. But I need to know something." "What? Is this real? Will you still be here in 6 months? A year? 5 years?" Her voice cracked. "Because Sophia is getting attached. I'm getting attached. And if this is just a phase for you, if you're going to get bored or busy or decide this was a mistake, I need to know now, before it goes any further." Alexander had known this conversation was coming. He'd been asking himself the same questions, testing his commitment, looking for the moment when the novelty would wear off. But it hadn't. If anything, his certainty had only grown. "Maria, I can't promise I'll be perfect. I've never done this before, and I'm going to make mistakes. But I can promise you this: I'm not going anywhere. This isn't a phase or charity or some wealthy person's whim. This is me choosing a different life. A better life." "But why us?" she asked again, the question she'd asked before. "You could have anyone. You could start your own family, have your own children. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent 15 years building a career. I've dated people who wanted my money or my connections or the status of being with me. I've been to 1,000 charity galas and sat through countless dinners where everyone was performing for each other." He stepped closer to Maria. "And then a 3-year-old walked into my kitchen and asked if she could spend one day with me because she didn't have a daddy. She wasn't performing. She wasn't after anything except connection. And she offered me the same thing in return, the chance to matter to someone." Maria's eyes were wet. "You already mattered. You're a billionaire. You're on magazine covers. None of that matters like this matters. None of it feels like Sophia climbing into my lap at the zoo. None of it fills the silence like her laughter. None of it makes me want to be better the way her questions do." He took a breath. "I'm not doing this for you, Maria. I mean, I am, but not only for you. I'm doing this for me. Because I was drowning in success and didn't even know it. Your daughter threw me a lifeline." Maria laughed through her tears. She loved that. She's very proud of being helpful. She should be. She helped me more than she knows. Alexander paused. But I need to ask you something too. Is this okay with you? Not just the financial help or the time with Sophia, but me, being part of your lives. Do you trust me? Maria looked at him for a long moment, and Alexander felt the weight of her scrutiny. She was a mother protecting her child, and she had every right to be cautious. Finally, she spoke. When I first started working for you, I thought you were cold, distant. One of those rich men who saw people as functions, not humans. And maybe you were a little bit. But this week, I've watched you get down on the floor to play with Sophia. I've seen you listen to her stories like they're the most important things in the world. I've watched you change your entire schedule, your entire life, to make room for us. She stepped forward and, to Alexander's surprise, hugged him. Yes, I trust you. We both do. Just, please don't let us down. We've had enough people leave. Alexander hugged her back, understanding the weight of what she was giving him, a second chance to be part of something real. I won't. I promise. Father's Day morning arrived with nervous excitement. Alexander had never celebrated Father's Day as an adult. After his own father died, the day had just been a reminder of loss. But when his doorbell rang at 9 a.m. sharp, all those old associations melted away. Sophia burst through the door in a yellow sundress, carrying a handmade card that was more glitter than paper and a small wrapped package. Happy Father's Day, Alex, she shouted, launching herself at him. Alexander caught her, lifting her up, his heart so full it hurt. Thank you, sweetheart. Open your card. Open your card. She wriggled with excitement. They settled on the couch, the same pristine white couch where Alexander used to conduct business calls, now decorated with colorful pillows Sophia had picked out. He opened the card carefully, aware he'd be keeping this forever. On the front, Sophia had drawn stick figures, a tall one labeled Alex, a medium one labeled Mom, and a small one labeled me. They were holding hands under a rainbow. Inside, in Maria's handwriting but clearly dictated by Sophia, it read, Dear Alex, thank you for being my family. Thank you for taking me to see elephants and teaching me about skyscrapers and reading me stories even when you're busy. You're the bestest friend I ever had. I love you infinity, +1. Love, Sophia. Alexander's vision blurred. He couldn't speak for a moment, just stared at the card with its crooked rainbow and stick figure family. Do you like it? Sophia asked anxiously. It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me, Alexander managed, his voice rough.
Thank you, Sophia.
I love you too. Infinity +2. You can't do infinity +2. Sophia giggled. Infinity is the biggest number. Then I love you infinity times infinity.
She thought about this.
Okay, that works. The package contained a handmade keychain, a small wooden heart painted with primary colors and decorated with more glitter, with World's Best Alex, written in shaky letters. Mom helped with the words, Sophia admitted. But I did all the painting and glitter. I can tell. It's perfect. Alexander attached it to his keys immediately, and the sight of it, this homemade, imperfect, beautiful thing, next to his Mercedes key fob somehow made perfect sense. They spent the day doing what Sophia called family stuff. They made pancakes together, with Sophia insisting that the more chocolate chips they added, the more nutritious it became. They played in the park, where Alexander pushed Sophia on the swings until his arms ached. They had a picnic lunch that Alexander had catered from a 5-star restaurant, though Sophia was most excited about the cookies. In the afternoon, they returned to the penthouse for what had become their daily ritual, story time. But today, Sophia had a special request. Can you tell me about your daddy? She asked, settling into Alexander's lap with her favorite book. Alexander glanced at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. He took a breath, preparing to talk about something he'd avoided for years. My father was very busy, he began. He ran a big company and he traveled a lot.
I didn't see him as much as I would have liked.
That's sad, Sophia said matter-of-factly.
It was.
But when he was home, he would read to me. Every night he was there, no matter how late he got home. He'd come to my room and read me a story. What was your favorite? The Velveteen Rabbit. The one I read to you. Sophia looked up at him with those knowing eyes. Because it's about becoming real through being loved? Yes. You're real now, she said simply. Because we love you. Alexander held her tighter, this wise, wonderful child who saw through everything to the truth underneath. I am real now. Because of you. That evening, after Maria and Sophia had gone home, Alexander stood on his terrace and looked out at the city. A month ago, this view had represented achievement, success, the pinnacle of what he'd worked for. Now it just looked lonely. But he wasn't lonely anymore. He had a little girl who called him Alex and made him cards covered in glitter. He had Maria, who trusted him with her most precious person. He had a keychain that said, "World's Best Alex," and a corner of his living room dedicated to creativity and play. He had a family. His phone buzzed with a photo from Maria, Sophia asleep in her bed, clutching a framed photo of the three of them from the zoo, a small smile on her face. The message read, "She says you're her Father's Day miracle. I think she might be right. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for becoming real." Alexander saved the photo and replied, "Thank you for letting me. See you tomorrow." Tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that. A future full of sticky hands and endless questions and laughter that filled the silence. A future that looked nothing like the one he'd planned, and everything like the one he needed. As he headed inside, Alexander passed the Murano vase that had been replaced, another expensive, designer-chosen piece. On impulse, he picked it up and moved it to storage, replacing it with Sophia's latest artwork, a painting of what she called our family tree, complete with stick figures and a rainbow and enough glitter to last a lifetime. It was perfect. 3 months after that Father's Day, Alexander sat in his lawyer's office, signing papers that would change everything. Maria sat beside him, her hand trembling slightly as she signed her own name. "This is really happening," she whispered. "This is really happening," Alexander confirmed. The lawyer, a woman in her 60s who'd handled countless cases but seemed particularly moved by this one, smiled at them both. "The guardianship papers are filed. Alexander, you're now Sophia's legal guardian alongside Maria. In the event anything happens to Maria, Sophia will be in your care. You'll also have legal standing to make decisions regarding her education, medical care, and general welfare." It wasn't adoption. They discussed that and decided it wasn't right. Sophia knew Alexander wasn't her father, and he didn't want to pretend otherwise. But guardianship meant he was legally committed to her future, her well-being, her life. It meant he couldn't walk away, even if he wanted to. It meant family in the eyes of the law. "There's one more thing," the lawyer said, sliding another document across the desk. "The trust." Alexander had established a trust fund for Sophia, enough to ensure her education through graduate school, a down payment on a house when she was older, financial security for her entire life. Maria had cried when he'd first proposed it, insisting it was too much. "It's not enough," Alexander had replied. "It could never be enough for what she's given me." Now, looking at the finalized documents, he felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened, Sophia would be taken care of. She'd have choices he never had, security that didn't depend on working herself to exhaustion like Maria had been forced to do. After the lawyer's office, they headed back to the penthouse, which felt more like home than any place Alexander had ever lived. Over the past 3 months, it had been transformed. Yes, there was still expensive art on the walls and designer furniture in the living room, but now there were also crayon drawings held up with magnets on the refrigerator, a toy box in the corner overflowing with dolls and books, and photographs everywhere. Sophia at the zoo, the three of them at Central Park, Sophia and Alexander building a blanket fort. The biggest change was in Alexander himself. He'd restructured his work schedule, delegating more to his executive team and working from home 3 days a week. His business partners had been shocked at first, but the results spoke for themselves. He was sharper in meetings, more creative in strategy sessions, better at reading people and building relationships. Turns out that learning to communicate with a 3-year-old had made him a better businessman. More importantly, he was happier. The hollowness that had characterized his life for so long had been filled with laughter and questions and sticky hugs. He'd learned that the best investment wasn't in technology or real estate. It was in people, in relationships, in love.
Mom.
Alex. Sophia's voice rang through the penthouse as they entered. She'd been staying with Alexander for the afternoon while Maria ran errands, supervised by Alexander's assistant Jennifer, who'd become an unexpected ally in this new family dynamic. Sophia came running, wearing a princess dress over her regular clothes, a fashion choice she insisted on most days, her hair in lopsided pigtails she'd attempted herself. Guess what? Jennifer and me made cookies, and I only broke one egg on the floor, and it's almost cleaned up. Alexander and Maria exchanged amused glances. Almost cleaned up was Sophia's version of there's still egg in the grout. That sounds like quite an adventure, Alexander said, scooping her up. Did you save any cookies for us? Maybe. Jennifer says I have to learn about sharing and delayed gratif, waiting for things to make them better. Delayed gratification, Alexander supplied, carrying her toward the kitchen where Jennifer was indeed scrubbing egg off the floor. That one. She's very smart. She knows all the big words. Sophia patted Alexander's cheek. Did you do the papers? Both adults froze. They tried to keep the guardianship conversation simple, not wanting to worry Sophia or make her think anything was wrong with her mother. What papers, honey? Maria asked carefully. The ones that make Alex my forever family, Sophia said, as if it were obvious. Jennifer explained it. She said you were making it official that Alex loves us and will take care of us always. Like a promise you write down. Alexander met Jennifer's eyes over Sophia's head. His assistant mouthed sorry, but he shook his head. Sophia deserved honesty. Yes, he said, setting Sophia down so he could look at her properly. We did the papers. It means that I'm officially part of your family now. Not just in our hearts, but in the rules and laws that grown-ups have to follow. So, you can't change your mind? Sophia asked, and there was something in her voice, a vulnerability that spoke to every time someone had left, every broken promise, every abandonment. I can't change my mind, Alexander confirmed. And I wouldn't want to. You're stuck with me, Sophia. Forever. She studied his face with that unnerving intensity children have, as if she could see through to his soul. Whatever she saw there satisfied her, because she nodded firmly.
Good.
Because I don't want to have to find a new Alex. You're the only one I want. I'm the only one you've got, Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion. That night, after cookies and dinner, and the usual bedtime routine that Alexander had become part of, he read Sophia her bedtime story. They'd moved past The Velveteen Rabbit to longer books now, currently working through Charlotte's Web, which Sophia had insisted on despite it being above her age level because she'd heard it was about friendship and sacrifice. Alex. Sophia asked as he closed the book. Yes. Do you ever miss being alone? The question caught him off guard. What makes you ask that? Because your house was so quiet before. And now it's loud with me. I thought maybe sometimes you miss the quiet. Alexander set the book aside and pulled Sophia into a hug. Sometimes I do appreciate quiet, he admitted, because he'd learned that honesty was crucial with children. But I never miss being alone. Not anymore. You know why? Why? Because I didn't know how lonely I was until I wasn't lonely anymore. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was empty. You filled up all that empty space with color and noise and life. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Not even for $1 million? Not even for all the money in the world. Sophia seemed satisfied with this. She snuggled deeper into her pillow, in the bedroom that had been a guest room but was now decidedly hers, decorated with clouds painted on the ceiling and stuffed animals arranged just so. Alex, one more thing. What is it, sweetheart? I know you're not my daddy, and I know my real daddy left before I was born. But I think maybe that's okay because if he'd stayed, I might not have you. And I like having you better than having someone who didn't want to stay. Alexander's heart broke and healed simultaneously. I want to stay, Sophia. Forever. You believe me? I believe you infinity plus infinity. After she fell asleep, Alexander found Maria on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. She asked you about the guardianship? Maria said without turning around. She already knew. Jennifer told her. I should be angry, but I'm not. She deserves to know she's secure. Maria finally looked at him. Can I tell you something? I've been terrified every day for 4 years that I'd mess this up, that I'd fail her, that I wouldn't be enough, that my choices would limit her life. And then you came along, and suddenly I'm not alone in this anymore. Suddenly, she has someone else who loves her, who'll catch her if I drop the ball, who'll give her opportunities one could never afford. You're an incredible mother, Maria. Nothing I do changes that. I know, but it's easier to be incredible when you have help. She smiled. You've given us so much, Alexander. More than money or security. You've given us a family. You gave me one first, Alexander countered. I was so lost, Maria. I'd achieved everything I thought I wanted, and I was miserable. And then Sophia asked if she could spend one day with me, and everything changed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. This view that used to represent isolation now represented connection. Somewhere out there were people Alexander cared about, causes he supported, a community he'd finally learned to be part of. His phone buzzed with a message from his executive team. The quarterly earnings were record-breaking again. Another success, another milestone. He acknowledged it briefly and put the phone away. There'd be time for business tomorrow. Tonight was for standing on this terrace with Maria, knowing that Sophia was asleep in her room, safe and loved and secure. Tonight was for appreciating how far he'd come from the man who'd been annoyed by a child's laughter interrupting his morning routine. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For trusting me with her. With both of you. For giving me a chance when you had every reason to keep your distance. For letting me be part of this. Maria took his hand. Thank you for seeing us. Really seeing us, not just as your housekeeper and her kid, but as people worth knowing, worth loving. Worth loving, Alexander repeated. That's exactly what you are. A year after that first Father's Day, Alexander stood in the same lawyer's office, but this time the papers on the desk were different. Adoption? Maria stared at him in shock. Alexander, we talked about this. Sophia knows you're not her father. I'm not asking to replace her father, Alexander interrupted gently. I'm asking to officially be her parent. Guardianship means I'm responsible for her. Adoption means she's mine and I'm hers, legally and completely. No questions, no ambiguity. If anything happens to you, which it won't, but if it did, there'd be no question about where she belongs. He pulled out another document. And this is for you. I want to buy you a house, Maria. Not as a gift. Well, yes, as a gift, but also as security. A place that's yours, that no landlord can take away, that you can give to Sophia someday. A home. Maria was crying now, and Alexander felt his own eyes sting. I can't accept. You can and you will, because we're family, and family takes care of each other. You've been taking care of me just as much as I've been taking care of you. You've taught me how to be human again, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself. Let me do this. Please. The adoption process took 6 months. There were home studies and interviews and background checks. Through it all, Sophia took it in stride, excited to have what she called official papers that prove Alex is mine. The day the adoption was finalized, they threw a party. Alexander, who'd once avoided social gatherings, filled his penthouse with people, Maria's friends from the Bronx, Sophia's preschool classmates, even some of Alexander's business associates who'd become genuine friends as he'd learned to let people in. Sophia wore a fancy dress and her favorite sneakers, refusing to compromise on comfort. She ran through the crowd accepting congratulations like a tiny dignitary, explaining to anyone who'd listen that she now had legal papers proving Alex is my parent, which means forever and ever. At one point, Alexander found himself on the terrace, his thinking spot, watching the party through the windows. His penthouse, once pristine and silent, was full of laughter and music and the beautiful chaos of life. Having second thoughts? Maria appeared beside him, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. Not a single one. He took the glass she offered. Although I am wondering how we're going to get glitter out of the carpet. Sophia's craft table seems to have exploded. Maria laughed. Welcome to parenthood. Glitter is eternal. I wouldn't have it any other way. They clinked glasses, and Alexander marveled at how natural this felt, standing here with Maria, watching their daughter, charm a room full of adults, planning for a future that included science fair projects and parent-teacher conferences and teenage drama he wasn't remotely prepared for. She asked me something this morning, Maria said. She asked if we were going to get married. Alexander nearly choked on his champagne. What did you tell her? I told her that you and I love each other very much, but as friends and family. That not everyone who loves each other gets married. That our family looks different from some families, but that doesn't make it less real. Good answer. Alexander paused. But for the record, if you ever wanted, I would, not that I'm assuming. Maria laughed and kissed his cheek. Alexander, I love you. You're my best friend, my co-parent, my family. But we work exactly as we are. Let's not complicate it. We work exactly as we are, Alexander agreed, relieved and also oddly touched. He did love Maria, deeply, genuinely. But she was right. What they had was perfect in its own way, a family built on friendship and mutual respect and shared love for a little girl who'd changed both their lives. Inside, Sophia spotted them and waved frantically. Alex.
Mom.
Come here. I need you for the picture. They went, of course. They always did when Sophia called. The photographer arranged them, Alexander kneeling on one side, Maria on the other, Sophia in the middle holding up her adoption certificate like a trophy. Say, family, the photographer called. Family, Sophia shouted, and the flash captured them. 3 people who'd found each other in the most unexpected way, who'd built something beautiful from loneliness and hope, who'd proven that family isn't just about blood or traditional structures, but about choice and commitment and love. Later, after the party ended and the guests had gone home, after Sophia had finally crashed from her sugar high and been put to bed, Alexander stood in her doorway, watching her sleep. She clutched her adoption certificate in one hand and her stuffed rabbit in the other, a smile on her face even in dreams. Thank you, he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. Thank you for asking me that question. Thank you for seeing past my walls. Thank you for teaching me what matters. He thought back to that moment in his kitchen, 11 months ago, when a little girl had arranged his pots into cities. When he'd been annoyed by the disruption to his carefully controlled life. When he'd been so close to sending them away. What if he had? What if he'd maintained his boundaries, kept his distance, stayed in his comfortable isolation? He would have missed all of this. The laughter, the love, the messy, beautiful reality of being needed and needed by someone. He would have missed becoming real. Alexander pulled out his phone and looked at his home screen. A photo of Sophia covered in paint from an art project, grinning with pure joy. His wallpaper used to be his company logo. Now it was this. Proof that he'd chosen right, that he'd found what he'd been missing. His phone buzzed with an email from his executive team. Another deal closed. Another success. He'd review it tomorrow. Right now, he had more important things to think about, like how Sophia had mentioned wanting to learn to ride a bike, and he'd need to research the best way to teach her. Like how Maria's birthday was coming up and Sophia wanted to plan a surprise party. Like how he had parent-teacher conferences next week and needed to make sure his schedule was clear. These were the things that mattered now. These small, daily, beautiful things that made up a life. As Alexander headed to his own bedroom, he passed the living room and saw the blanket fort Sophia had insisted they build before the party. It was still standing, draped over chairs and secured with books, a small kingdom of imagination in the middle of his expensive furniture. He could take it down. He should take it down. He had business associates coming by tomorrow for a meeting. Instead, he left it up. Let them see the blanket fort. Let them know that Alexander Hayes, billionaire tech entrepreneur, was also a father who built pillow fortresses and read bedtime stories and had a refrigerator covered in crayon drawings. Let them know he'd finally figured out what success really meant. As he climbed into bed, Alexander's last thought before sleep was a memory. Sophia's small voice asking, "I don't have a daddy. Can I spend one day with you, sir?" One day had become forever. And forever had become the greatest achievement of his life. Not the billions in his bank account. Not the companies he'd built or the deals he'd closed. Not the magazine covers or the industry awards. Sophia, Maria, family, love. These were his legacy. These were his success. And as he drifted off to sleep in his penthouse that now truly felt like home, Alexander Hayes smiled, knowing that a 3-year-old's simple question had led him to the one thing he'd been searching for all along. A place to belong. A purpose beyond profit. A reason to become real. In the room down the hall, Sophia dreamed of elephants and rainbows and a man named Alex who'd proven that families don't have to look like storybooks to be filled with happily ever after. And somewhere in the Bronx, in a new house with 2 bedrooms and a yard, Maria slept peacefully for the first time in years, knowing her daughter was safe, loved, and surrounded by people who'd chosen to stay. Not because they had to,
but because they wanted to.
Because that's what family does. Forever and always. Infinity plus infinity.
The end.